to use a kind of tech startup term, like failing fast and realizing kind of what your weak points are and not being super precious about stuff, and kind of learning how to iterate and change things through experimentation, and kind of taking off your internal sensors and kind of opening up a sense of play is really important when it comes to making creative work or just thinking outside of the box in general.
For music, the equivalent is like, did you do your scales every day, your drills? And, in order to achieve excellence, you sometimes went years and years of being really bad at something. And you had to be okay being bad at something. And I think that's a really big lesson, is that if you can't become good unless you're okay being bad at something, and excelling in any of these things growing up. And it doesn't have to be music. It could be you were on the lacrosse team or something, but everyone understands what went into excelling at something on that great level. And I think that's incredibly important to do anything creative, because like you said, it'll be your 25th take or something like that, but you can't give up after the third.
Hello and welcome to Tuesdays with Morrisey, where we share insights from great thinkers. Today I'm excited to be joined by Michael and David Litwak, two brothers in New York City making moves and expressing themselves in radically different ways. Michael, as a filmmaker, wrote most recently of Molly and Max in the Future, which premiered at the 2023 South by Southwest Film Festival and boasted 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. And David, as a technology entrepreneur at Morrisey, turned founder of Maxwell, a social club based in Tribeca. David and Michael, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Both in New York City, David in Manhattan, Michael in Brooklyn. What does the day in the life look like of a filmmaker and a social club entrepreneur? And if you want, you can share what you think the other's day looks like. It's up to you guys.
I think, a day in my life kind of changes week to week. And that's part of what I like about what I do, is that it's never really the same from day to day or from week to week or from month to month. And so there'll be a couple months where I'm writing all day, every day. There'll be a couple months where I'm, and sometimes I'll break that pattern to go and shoot a commercial or a piece of branded content. And there will be weeks where I'm editing, or I'm doing color correction, or giving notes on a cut. I often have 5 or 6 different kind of things I'm working on. Some of them are super small projects that might only take a month or two. Others are, projects that will take 5 or 6 years, from start to finish. And so I have a bunch of different things in kind of different stages, and it kind of depends on what pops up at the beginning of the week and what kind of needs to get done and what's the most relevant. So, right now I'm in a phase where I'm pre-visualizing my next film. And so I'm using 3D storyboarding software to kind of, test out the script and cut together a rough version of the film and kind of see it in front of me, and then go back and kind of revise and rewrite as I'm going. And so I'm kind of fully in my editing software all day, every day. But, sometimes I'll get taken away onto something else and end up coming back to, it just kind of pushing it forward any way I can.
I like the concept of pre-visualizing. One of the things I'm excited about for this conversation is just talking about how the creative process is similar, even if the expression is very different from a business venture to a film. David, how about you? What's a day in the life look like?
Yeah, to echo exactly what you said, I think there are a lot of similarities. I think that for people who don't know, Maxwell Social is a social club in Tribeca, physical location, 8,000 square feet, built like a kind of living room, and they have a set of kitchens you can cook in, so very different than your Soho House or Casa Cipriani or Zero Bond. And we've been around for about a year and a half, and my day can be as unglamorous as trying to fix the whatever plumbing leak happened to sprout out in the morning, or figuring out exactly how we're building membership in a more strategic way. I think it's, being an entrepreneur is, I think, a constant kind of game of triaging. You're kind of trying to figure out what's the most important thing you need to do now. You don't want to, be focused on something that's going to be good for the company in 12 months. But you also don't want to, be too focused on what is sometimes called either urgent over the important. Mm-hmm. So you need to find a way to kind of be able to do deep work and balance that with literally leaks in the plumbing. And so, we are constantly tweaking and optimizing, just in the last 24 hours, we noticed that one of our corner kind of tables, banquettes, wasn't being used as much because it was a 12-person table, so people weren't really sliding into it on a night, and we decided to get rid of it and order 3 individual smaller tables because we felt like people would actually use that area more. And literally, we're spending a bunch of money on curtains that we can use to cut off space so we can do more 12-person dinners, 20-person cocktail hours, things like that, instead of just the 100-person, 100 people that we can fit in one of the rooms. But then we're also building our own tech platform for Maxwell with our own set of kind of ability to take reservations and be able to come to events, and it has things like Go Blacklist, and it has things like a bunch of different features that are unique to us, and we're figuring out how a tech platform kind of like factors in to a IRL hospitality thing. So there's a little bit of tech product management, ideation, literally mood boarding for what these curtains are going to look like. And I've got, 50 different examples of different types of curtains with different fringe and different, ways they hang and stuff like that, all the way to like trying to figure out exactly how you do a banquet in a corner, which that might be awkward where the seats go, to, just, the nitty gritty. So I think it varies every day, and it's your job to kind of figure out what you have to do to kind of pay the bills, but also keep your eye on the prize.
Yeah, it's amazing how similar that is. The things I picked up on were there's a segment of importance of vision. You have to have a vision. You need technology tools to execute. You need deep work, and you need to focus on the things that come up on a daily basis while still keeping the big picture moving. So I think that's super cool. We're already laying a good foundation there. It's clear that you guys are both like super creative and independent thinkers. What was the environment like for you guys growing up that kind of shaped this creativity?
Yeah, I mean, this is the one I'm actually also very curious to see what Michael says, like from his perspective. Like we, had 2 parents who invested very heavily, I think, in our extracurriculars. And again, I'm very curious what the narrative in Michael's head is versus mine. But like from my perspective, there was like a constant focus on helping us try to find what we were passionate about. So, I went to robotics camp in middle school, and then my mom helped me write a grant to NASA to actually get funding for our high school's robotics team, for example. And I know that I think Michael went to the same robotics camp, but I think, for him, it was film, and obviously our parents helped him pursue that. But extracurriculars were a really big kind of emphasis. And I think that, down to I think there was always a emphasis on planning and trying to figure out what you wanted to do with your life. And I think that I personally like that and hope to raise my kids the same way, because I think that there's this culture of don't worry, you're in college. You don't need to figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life. Don't worry, you're in your 20s. You don't have to figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life. And before you know it, you're like 35. And I have friends right now, I'm 36, who still don't really know what they're doing. And I think that I don't view it as a negative thing. I think, I don't view it as some negative tiger mom or helicopter mom kind of quality to kind of pressure your kids a little bit to be like, what is it you want to do that you're passionate about? And it means that you might be able to have your cake and eat it too. I think too often the idea of following your passions, everyone thinks you're retreating to a lake and becoming Hemingway or something like that, and you're going to become poor. And so I've been in these debates with people where they go, it's either be poor Hemingway or be rich banker who hates your life or something like that. And I think the way you don't have to make that choice is by kind of figuring out early, what do you like? What are you passionate about that you can also make money at, and really refining that skill and that craft. And I think that was a huge emphasis growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with all that. I don't have a much different narrative. I think our parents were just really supportive, and they really they never tried to force us to do things that they wanted to do, it was very much a kind of figure out what you like, and then how can we kind of support you and push you, find opportunities. And, when you're a 12-year-old boy, you're not really Googling, where can I go to summer camp to learn about movies? But, they were, and they looked up and found like a filmmaking camp and, sent me there. And, I went and did the robotics one year and I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. And then the next year, I think I went and did their like little movie program and discovered that I really, really enjoyed that. So I think they did a really great job of kind of finding opportunities for us to kind of explore the things that we were interested in and also be kind of very realistic about kind of what those different kind of pathways would entail. And going into the film industry, it's like or the tech industry, both are very high risk. But I think part of it was like, doing some research and kind of, sending us to find out things on our own and learn about it and realize, what does this world actually entail? And is this something that I actually want to spend my time pursuing? And, once we had kind of done that, and, I know David, thought about becoming kind of a full-time musician at one point, but I think part of it was also like, you have multiple things you're interested in and, what are the things that, will satisfy you on a couple different levels. And, working, if you're going into the arts, like what does a real career look like in the arts and how do you kind of sustain that, regardless of kind of what, subset of that industry you're in.
I think it's interesting. Like, something I've seen is, growing up in the Midwest, like we all, like at least in my family, we all played musical instruments, but it wasn't to develop necessarily a connection to music, in my opinion. It was more like that's what you did to be like a well-rounded, cultured human being. What do you guys think the keys are, like in encouraging people to pursue some of these things, but also pursuing like a deeper connection rather than it being somewhat formative?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have an amazing answer. I mean, I think like we played, I think our parents encouraged us to play music and, we both kind of grew up playing piano, but at a certain point, I think David realized he liked the trumpet more than the piano. And I realized I liked the guitar more than the piano. And it was like, growing up playing classical piano was something where like we just didn't really love that type of music. I mean, I still enjoy it, but I don't think personally it was that much fun to play. So, I think it's interesting because I think we were kind of encouraged to play music because it was a good thing to do. But then I think it did end up giving me an appreciation for some of those things. And so I think it's probably a balance with every parent of like not letting your kid quit too soon, but also not, pushing them too far to do something that they don't enjoy. And so I think at a certain point, I realized that I didn't really get that much joy out of playing piano and I wanted to switch to guitar or, pursue other kind of creative endeavors. But, I think, and I think our parents respected that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like I just saw a James Clear quote today that was something like, you don't get your inspiration on your first take, you get it on your 25th. There's something that comes from doing the reps and getting the bad ideas out of the way to get to a different point of inspiration.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, I think I teach writing to screenwriters, and I think there's a lot of kind of smoke and mirrors and fog around the creative process because, people like to create a sense of mystery. But I think that kind of, to use a kind of tech startup term, like failing fast and realizing kind of what your weak points are and not being super precious about stuff and kind of learning how to kind of iterate and change things through experimentation and kind of taking off your internal sensors and kind of opening up a sense of play is really important when it comes to making creative work or just kind of thinking outside of the box in general.
I think that inevitably, I feel like kids need to be taught to excel at something and really have the grit to succeed. I've noticed this actually now that I've probably over my career employed 250 to 300 people, but over 2 companies over like 13, 14 years. And whether or not someone has the grit to like try again, I see the people who need a really quick dopamine hit when it comes to how they're working, meaning like if they spend a week in the wilderness trying to figure something out, they're just lost like very often, and they can't do it. They get really discouraged, and then very often those employees are the ones that like you can't put them on a really big project or something. And I've noticed this, that like I've had friends who almost became professional Olympians. I've had, friends who, and the key here is almost, it's not like that they had to become an Olympian to do this, but they put 10,000 hours in or whatever. And they excelled at something. And, for music, the equivalent is like, did you do your scales every day? Did you do your drills? And, in order to achieve excellence, you sometimes went years and years of being really bad at something, and you had to be okay being bad at something. And I think that's a really big lesson, is that if you can't become good unless you're okay being bad at something, and excelling in any of these things growing up, whether or not it's music or sports or whatever. I have an interview question that I always ask, which is like, did you ever excel at something and compete intensely at something? And it doesn't have to be music. It could be you were on the lacrosse team or something, but everyone understands what went into excelling at something on that great level. And I think that's incredibly important to do anything creative, because like you said, it'll be your 25th take or something like that. But you can't give up after the third.
Can you speak a little bit, David, to you went to Berkeley, you went the tech route. What initially drew to your path, and then what did you guys build at Mosio? Because I noticed you started that pretty quick after graduating.
Yeah, it was about 10 months after. I was really bored working for someone else. We also, a detail of our youth that we haven't mentioned is that our mothers worked on and off as a naturalist on board cruise ships and for the Smithsonian. And so we've been able to travel, basically for free to, I don't know what your count is, Michael, but I think mine's like 90 plus countries since we were very little. And so we spent a lot of our, every year kind of going to someplace new. So I got kind of the travel bug, and I decided I wanted to do something in the travel industry. And I had this kind of big idea of doing a big multimodal travel search engine, buses versus trains versus planes. And I'll spare the, what ended up being like now a 14-year journey, but the company's 70 people. It's being run by someone who's worked for me for a very long time. I'm no longer the CEO, and we pivoted a few times to end up in doing local ground transportation, basically. So we run Hertz's limousine service, Air France's first class limousine service, things like that. So we started out with this big idea and realized various reasons why it was not feasible, and kind of did our twists and turns to get to something that was making money. And in that case, it ended up being, I think what's kind of called a base hit in Silicon Valley, and meaning like not $1 billion company that you've heard of and read about. We're not Uber, but it's still successful and employs 75 people. But 4 years ago, I was ready to move on, and I was just like, great, like I want to start new things, and took a pretty big career pivot after that.
What was the inspiration to start Maxwell?
I think any good entrepreneur probably this is true of, and that like where we are fascinated with systems and system thinking. It's the reason why I'm interested in geopolitics. You got culture and religion and history and geography all smashing into one, into like how a system works together and how countries interact with each other. And I think the same thing is true for social life. I think there are so many fascinating elements that we used to gather at our Italian American clubs or Armenian men's associations, or we used to our churches, synagogues, and mosques, and Rotarians, Kiwanis, Elks, Moose. And if you are a young urban secular millennial, like that, these institutions aren't as relevant to you and anywhere near as relevant to you as they used to be. And I was kind of fascinated by like, how do you create a space and a club and a group of people that's based around an organizing principle that isn't frankly racist, sexist, or religious. There's this loneliness crisis happening right now. I think it's phenomenally easy to meet new people. It's phenomenally hard to maintain a group of friends as you grow older and older. And every time I say this, I see like a kind of an aha moment in people's eyes where like by the time you're like 24, 25, you're no longer going to like the same pre-games and house parties you did with all your college friends who moved to the city. You end up like someone moves to, a different part of the city, someone has a kid, someone moves away. And before you know it, you're like, you have a lot of friends, but it's just like you barely ever see them. And so we were kind of fascinated by this idea of like, all those community examples that I said, were all had the same structure. They required contribution. Either you were in the marching band or you cooked Shabbat. They had a campus. They had rituals, whether it was Christmas or Sunday, church, or whether or not it was game days or homecoming. They had curation. You had to get into Harvard. You had to be Italian. We realized like you could duplicate this in modern social life in a city, but how? And so we were fascinated by that problem. And I think it's just like, one just I think it's one of the hardest problems out there. And to emphasize this, I had a friend who said something to me once. He's like, the interesting thing about what you're doing, David, is that all the traditional startup advice is reversed for you. He's like, the traditional startup advice is go after the customer who has the greatest customer pain, but you do not start a social club with the people who have like no friends. I hate to say that. Like, it's like you need to be cognizant of, if you're going to start a movement and a trend, you need to start a social club in a certain particular way. And it's ironically often with the people who need your product the least. And it's been an incredibly hard nut to crack. And I think it's also a very fascinating one.
Yeah, super cool. I think it's really timely and relevant too. I had a guest a couple weeks ago named Dr. Corey Keyes, who's one of the leading researchers on the science of human flourishing. And I think his work is particularly relevant for what you're saying is with the disintegration of social groups, religious, ethnic, cultural, like there is a gap to be part of something bigger.
Yeah, I think people want to belong. And I think that's like, it's funny. We suspected these things from the very beginning, but I wouldn't say that we nailed all this right away by any means. I think we were like, great, like people want curation of people. People want we thought they wanted these events or they wanted these other things. And this is where I think all the other clubs go wrong. And ultimately, you don't want a co-working space where you like see Taylor Swift 50 feet away. That's not like what people are like going for. I think that people want to feel part of something. They want to feel seen, and that's an extremely hard thing to pull off in this day and age where everyone's so transient, and it's so hard to like the systems of our society are kind of like working against us and they used to work for us. You used to be Italian, live in the same 5 square blocks, go to the same church, go to the same Italian American club, probably marry a girl you met at church, start a business with someone you met at church, and make friends at the Italian American club. And the world was set up to make this easy for you, and it's no longer set up that way.
Yeah, Michael, could you speak a little bit to your path as a filmmaker? It's not something I don't think a lot of people know a ton about, and I also think it's something that's maybe over glorified and underappreciated how hard it actually is to advance to any level of success.
Yeah, totally. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I kind of just grew up watching big budget action adventure spectacle films like Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Jurassic Park. And that's kind of really what got me into films and filmmaking in the first place. And then kind of as I got older, my kind of palette expanded a bit, and I found myself kind of falling in love with what I call a little bit more character-driven films. So movies like Annie Hall or Rushmore or Y Tu Mama Tambien or Amelie, or movies that kind of have a specific, unique view of the world, but are not necessarily about life and death stakes, and are often about people walking around New York complaining about their therapists. And so I, just kind of fell in love with all different types of movies. And I moved to New York to go to NYU because I knew I wanted to go to film school, and then started just making short films. And in the process of just making a bunch of shorts, I kind of realized that, I wanted to make movies that were true to kind of what originally inspired me to get into filmmaking in the first place, but also kind of true to what kind of kept me involved in filmmaking. And so, I made shorts for a long time, and eventually got an agent and a manager, and had some kind of viral internet success that helped with that. And then I worked on a variety of different jobs as a writer, sometimes as a director, sometimes as both, kind of working in Hollywood development, setting up projects at different companies, trying to get actors and talent and financing attached to different films. And for many years, I was kind of on that hustle, and it looked like I was going to get my first feature made, kind of the traditional method. But then COVID happened, and basically everything kind of, my main kind of project and my main priority at the time fell apart. And so I kind of had to go back to the drawing board and, write a whole new movie that I knew I could kind of make on my own with my friends. And so, we raised, independent equity from 12 different financiers, and then basically started filming the movie in my living room, kind of building out the miniatures and the special effects. And then, eventually we're able to raise a full budget and, hired a small cast and crew and shot for 4 weeks in Manhattan. And so that was, my first feature, Molly and Max in the Future, which is available on all VOD platforms. And, that has kind of opened up the door for bigger and better opportunities. And so, it's you always have a lot of different kind of things going on. And I'm, in the process of working on my second film right now, and we're trying to raise the money and kind of go through that whole kind of process again. So it's definitely a kind of Sisyphean struggle, and it's very difficult. And, it is, it can feel a little bit like an addiction sometimes because it costs a lot of money, and you have to, really hustle and grind for a long time. But once you are able to, go out and make something that you care about, it all makes it worth it.
In both filmmaking, any creative act, and building companies is kind of masochistic. Help me. Masochistic. Thank you. What is it about those things that like lit your spark around like wanting to keep doing them and doing them in the first place? Just the love of the movies, but like, you just have to dig so deep when you're building these companies or building these films, and like to do the reps every day.
I mean, I think I find it stimulating on a lot of different levels. And to me, I think making a movie is kind of like designing a puzzle box, and it kind of works on an intellectual level, but it also has to work on an emotional level. And then it has to work on a logistical and financial level too. And so you have all of these kind of different sides of your brain that are being activated at once. And, of course, there's the political side and the kind of people management side of things. And so I actually see a lot of kind of parallels of running a tech startup as it is to kind of getting a film off the ground, because you're working with a team of people and you have to kind of use different people's expertises and, take their opinions and advice, but also kind of stay true to what you originally had in mind. And you have to be able to kind of pivot and collaborate and, use kind of a variety of different skill sets, whether it's kind of visual design or, figuring out how to build a budget and stick to it, or, building out a schedule, or kind of how you kind of delegate work within a 5-person team or a 10-person team or a 100-person team. So I think that, it feels like the most kind of stimulating version of things. It's my favorite art form. And so because of that, I think it just works on a lot of different levels to kind of keep me captivated.
Yeah, David, anything you would add on that? Just thinking about the parallel of building companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something we talk about with each other all the time. Usually when we get lunch, it's usually commiserating about what moron has done something stupid that we had to deal with or whatever. Or and it's a very similar dynamic to having to beg for money from people to realize a vision, and whether that vision's a film or a vision is a social club or a tech startup or whatever. I think it's it's a pretty one-to-one mapping in terms of like the trials and tribulations for sure. But in terms of like the original question you had about like, well, why? Like, I mean, there's days definitely when I ask myself the same thing where I'm like, wouldn't it be nice to like, I was watching Friday Night Lights recently. I was like, just to be a small town football coach. I was like, sounds like a simple life. Like, it's like, and it's definitely like, crossed my mind that wasn't the stress. But I think I'm a believer that like the highest risk thing you can do is take no risk, especially in like a world like, is changing as rapidly as we have today. But I think there's an element of, you could say enlightened kind of, I won't say selfishness, but it's a more aligned viewpoint, is to be like, okay, great, like you're gonna get stressed no matter what. So part of the motivation is definitely be in control of your life, and as opposed to being at the whims of someone else, which I think is I honestly gives me more stress. But I think it's also, Michael alluded to, like, that it's a big puzzle. And the funny thing is, I don't really play games. I don't like puzzles, actually. When people go like, do we all want to like have a game night? I'm like, not really my thing. But I do think that there is kind of like a really interesting, it's one big puzzle. Like with Maxwell, we're trying to figure out what's going to work and make people go aha and click. And part of what makes it such a cool thing to solve is that if you are able to solve that puzzle, one that and I think the best entrepreneurs solve puzzles that no one else has solved before. I'd say that's true for art as well. The best filmmakers, artists are people who are able to express emotion in a particular way. And I think about everyone was so amazed with Ted Lasso. It's like, oh, this guy went and had a corny positive thing, like in a era of high drama, films and TV shows, and he was daring enough to do it, and kind of, I think, demonstrated that people wanted this other thing, and he understood people's emotions maybe on a level that other people didn't. And I think the same thing is true for entrepreneurship. You understand that there's a need that isn't being met, and it bothers you enough that you want to solve it. Yeah.
In many regards, entrepreneurship, building companies is an art form. So I guess with that as backdrop, do you guys have a working, like, personalized definition of art?
Actually, if I can chime in, Michael, like, there's an interesting trend right now where more and more entrepreneurs are starting startup studios. And I find that choice of language to be really interesting, because obviously studios usually referred to art. And it's because there's an acknowledgement of like that there's an art here. Like, yes, okay, hiring is this, and yes, the tech component of it, but like the best, there's some kind of informal startup studios like Elon Musk's companies kind of count, but there's one called Ali Corp, and the guy, his name's Kevin Ryan, and he founded within 8 months he founded MongoDB, Business Insider, and Gilt Group, which and
pretty good.
Got like a huge track record of spitting these out, and there's probably 10 of them. Another one's called Pre-Hype, and so they did Markbox and a couple others like managed by Q, and so they've figured out like it's, and they almost have like an art form. Is it like D2C startups, CPG brands, whatever, right? In the same exact ways, like I work in mixed media or I work in sculpture or something like that, right? Like, and it's understood that like you've figured out the basics of how to build, a statue or how to build a company, and so I think the best entrepreneurs are trying to erect the support system around them so they can be more of an artist in a way, and do less of the nitty gritty. So I think, not to sound highfalutin here, but entrepreneurship in its highest form probably is an extremely matched to art.
I don't know. I agree.
You don't know if you agree?
Yeah. I mean, like, it's not to discount why I don't think being an entrepreneur is easy. And I think there's kind of a difference between art and craft. And I think, that line is not something that's clearly defined ever, and so, I think everyone kind of has to define that for themselves. And I'm not trying to, dictate that my opinion is the only one that is valid in this kind of huge question. But, I think kind of, if I had to simplify it down, I think art is about kind of sharing your perspective with the world. And I think that, like, obviously when you're making a film or a painting or something, whether you are the patron of a king and they're paying you to create, frescoes, or you are making a film that's financially sustainable, you're kind of sharing your opinion and your view of the world with other people. And I think companies, I think companies can share your opinion of the world, but at the end of the day, they're kind of these living, breathing organisms that are never quite finished. So I don't know if I would kind of constitute them as art, especially when a lot of them are their kind of primary purpose is to generate profit. And again, I don't think that, movies generate profit too. And so I don't think art is ever like fully separate from the commercial side of things. But I don't know if I would call tech companies art.
No, I think that's fair. Well, you've never written a really hype press release then. David,
I think, I said like, at its highest form, right? But I actually don't think that's like the average company is necessarily art, but also the average, toddler throwing, paint at the wall necessarily, despite his mother's protestations, is probably not necessarily art in that way either, right? Like, I think, what is art is obviously modern artists that traditionalists will scoff at and will also debate it within within the discipline as well. But I think that, I've always said this to Michael, I think his job's a lot harder than mine. You can think my business is shit, but if people buy the products, by definition, you're wrong. Like, it is a good business. Whereas like art is a lot more subjective. So I think it's way farther on the spectrum, but I do believe it is a spectrum, which is, ultimately you're putting a view out into the world and insight in some way. And I do get somewhat compensated based on whether or not it resonates. Like, and I think that is very true of business as well. And, one's ability to kind of express that and figure out how a system works. Like, if it's science versus art or whatever, I think, it's not definable necessarily. Like, maybe that's what I'm kind of getting at. It's like, it can be extremely difficult to figure out what resonates, and you kind of put this idea out there and go, do you like it, kind of a thing, and people go, oh yeah. And like, there's a guy who's a member at Maxwell actually, who's known for creating, in his own words, the stupidest or most stupid, whatever, app on earth. And it was literally an app that measured air time. So you'd have to throw your phone up in the air and it'd measure exactly how much time it was in the air. So needless to say, people were just like throwing their phones to win. And it was one dumbest app or whatever ever. And I was thinking, I was like, well, clearly it resonated in some deep way. Is that like a company? Hell no. Like, I mean, did he make some money off the downloads? I think so. Right. Like, and so what is that if not some degree of performance art that resonated and he made money off of? And so, it's not the strongest argument in my favor there, but yeah.
No, totally. Yeah, a couple weeks ago, I recorded with a guy named Matty Mo. Matty Mo's artist name is the most famous artist. He did some he was one of the first people to paint murals on the side of coffee shops, like Alfred Coffee, to drive business for the coffee shops. And he did a bunch of other things. Like he was behind that private jet experience where people were taking pictures on fake private jets. And now he's building an art city in New Mexico. And we had this conversation about what is the definition of art. For me, art is anything that inspires people to live their lives more fully. And Maddie's definition was art is something that connects us. So what I think both of you guys are doing, maybe not at Mosio, we can debate, but definitely at Maxwell and with like your films, Michael, are helping people see the world differently. We can do social groups differently and inspiring people to live their lives more fully.
I think that works. Yeah, I'm down for that definition.
Well, you guys have been really gracious with your time. Before we let you go, what's the best way to keep up with both of you?
I'm on Instagram at Michael Litwak, and I have a website, michaellitwak.com.
Yeah, I'm also on Instagram at David Litwak, and our website for Maxwell is maxwellsocial.com.
Awesome. We'll have links to both those links in the show notes, and thanks again for coming on the show. Thank you for listening to Tuesdays with Morrisey. That conversation was with Michael and David Litwak, two brothers in New York City. Michael as a filmmaker and David as an entrepreneur at Mosio turned founder of Maxwell, a social club based in Tribeca. What I enjoyed about the episode is thinking about how entrepreneurs and artists express themselves differently, but often with the same goal of connecting people. If you enjoyed the episode, share with a friend, and we'll see you here soon. Thanks.